making another dorm room recipe. I'll be doing 1 loaf of Belizean Creole bread in the toaster oven. You're watching the Bear Pantry Show. So this is going to be real simple. Here's what we're going to need. 2 cups plus 6 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. And then for the sugar, we're going to need 2 tablespoons plus 2 teaspoons. The butter is 1 tablespoon plus a teaspoon. The baking powder is only half a teaspoon. The coconut milk now changes to 4 ounces. The warm water is 2 ounces. And to activate our yeast, we're going to need a 1/4 cup of warm water, half a tablespoon of yeast, and a 1/4 teaspoon of white sugar. Now let's get started by activating our yeast. So to activate the yeast, we put the water, put the actual yeast, and the sugar. And we give it a stir. And we leave it here for a few minutes before we move on to the next stage. When making any type of bread, you should know that there are 2 types of yeast, rapid rise and active dry. I prefer to use the active dry because you have to activate it first and you can see if the yeast is bad before you put it in your product. However, the rapid rise, you add it to your dry ingredients when you're making breads and you don't know if it's good until the very end. I hope you guys are enjoying the little tidbits I'm inserting into the show. Right now I'm just adding our dry ingredients, the flour, the sugar, the baking powder. The butter is really considered as a wet ingredient. And if you notice, I tend to use it all the time at room temperature when I'm making bread. And that's because I think it cuts a little bit more easily into the flour for me. And we just want to cut it in well and then add our most important ingredient, which is the yeast mixture. And you always want to add this first before you do the milks and the waters and stuff, because if your dough is going to get too sticky, you want to make sure that the most important ingredient is already in the dough, okay? Now I'm adding our little bit of coconut milk. It's not a whole lot. It's a far cry from when we usually do the whole can when we do my big recipe from the book. But we want to add it in a little bit at a time, incorporate it well into the dough. And I suppose you could add more coconut milk rather than use warm water, but I think the texture comes out better when we use the water. So let's see how much of the water we're going to need. We're going to need some of this water. Add it a little bit at a time. You always want to add your wet ingredients a little bit at a time because you don't want to overwet the dough. Because if that happens, you're going to have to add more flour, and then it'll take away from the taste of your bread, because then you're going to have to add more sugar and you want to deal with that. You're going to find that if your dough is a little bit sticky, you need to knead it on a floured countertop. And now it's ready to be set aside. We put it in the same bowl that we kneaded it in because we don't want to clean anything else. And we cover it with a clean dishcloth for about 40 to 45 minutes. So it's right at about 45 minutes, and let's take a look at our dough. It's risen to, it's doubled. It's twice it was. It feels nice to touch too. So let's get it out. Small piece, right? You could even handle it with one hand, see? If you're having trouble with one of your hands, like I had trouble with my wrist the other day. And here's the trick to making our loaf beautifully smooth. We just want to roll the dough into the shape of a rectangle, and we want to roll it on both sides to make sure it's smooth on both sides, okay? And just kind of shape it up somewhat to make your rectangle look more like a rectangle. Measure the loaf pan to see the length, to see if that's going to be longer than the pan. And then now we want to pinch the end and roll it like we would a towel. And this is the same thing that we do when we're doing cinnamon buns, but normally we'd have all that cinnamon gooey stuff in the middle right here. But now we're just making plain old loaf, so we're just going to continue rolling it like we would a towel until we get to the end, and then measure it now against our loaf pan again to see if it's too long. And yes, it is a little bit too long, so we're going to have to go ahead and cut off a little piece of the edge of this, okay? We want to cut it to a little bit less than the pan, okay? So see now? Take a look from this angle and see that the size is now perfect. We're just going to pinch off the edges and then set it back in our pan. So we're going to cover that with our beautiful dish towel again, and I have dish towels just to cover bread with. They're perfect for just that. This little piece of dough, you know, as Belizeans we're going to call this brata. This is an extra little piece. So I'm just going to knead this into a perfect ball to make a little mini bread. And now I'm going to put my little signature that my Aunt Eileen showed me. I love doing this. I used to love when she did this too. I'm going to set it on this tray that comes with the toaster oven and let it rise with the next big loaf for another hour or so. This is right at 45 minutes later, and look how beautifully our dough has risen. Doesn't it look plump and fluffy? So I'm putting it in the toaster oven now on 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 40 minutes. Okay, so it's a total of 40 minutes. It smells amazing in here. Look at our beautiful bread. See how it filled the loaf pan? Let me set that down. Let me put the other one in, the little baby one. Let's feast our eyes on this. Doesn't it look lovely? And it smells so good, you guys. So it's cooled enough that I can dump. This is some of the grease from the butter. And let me tap it. You hear that sound that it made? That's how you know that it's cooked all the way through and it's not going to be like raw dough or clammy on the inside. Much like a watermelon, right? And like I said before, if we had left that little piece of dough in for the bread that's baking now, we could have rolled this loaf kind of taller, make it fatter that way instead of longer that way, and only had the one loaf, and we would not have been having to wait for that one. But it's okay. You know, this is the first time I'm trying this to make the one loaf, and then when we do the Creole bun, we'll do it that way, okay? And we'll get one big bun. So this is our Creole bread one loaf recipe. I'm having such a great time scaling down this recipe for you guys. This recipe is actually a quarter of the recipe that I have in my cookbook. Of course, I don't ever have the need for just one loaf of bread because my family is still big. But I do realize that there are a lot of single moms that are watching my show, and I know that it's sometimes you and one child, and one loaf of bread would be more than enough to satisfy your needs. Also, for the kids that are living in college, or the young adults that are living in college, I know that you don't have a stove in your dorm room, so that's why I cooked it in a toaster oven to show you that it can come out perfect in the toaster oven. And for my viewers with the physical challenges, this is awesome for you too, because if you can see the dough is a very small amount, you'll be able to knead it, very easily, and just put it in the toaster oven and be safe with it. Thank you guys so much for watching the show. Hit like if you liked the video. Thank you for subscribing, and until I see you again, take care.